The timbre and color have a drastic importance in Scarbo, and some elements in this piece is not actually music, but rather like sound effects, like for example the entrance motive. The piece starts from a door squeaking in your bedroom while you are sleeping in the empty apartment. Although this is a seed motif which unites the whole cycle, and you can find it also in other pieces, including Ondine. So this is essentially motif which you can find a number of times in Ondine, and this is the same motif. But here it has a quality of sound effect. So just to make sure we are on the same page, this is a piece by Maurice Ravel based on a poem by Aloysius Bertrand, and depicts adventures of a mystic creature, kind of a house goblin essentially, and which is as pleasant as poltergeist. How often have I seen him alight on the floor, pirouette on a foot, and roll through the room like the spindle fallen from the wand of a sorceress. So this is the story behind. That's why keeping in mind that unpredictability and spontaneity can be actually a goal in this piece. I would even exaggerate certain things and making them in a more drastically radical way. Like for example the entrance, I would start it not from mezzo forte but rather from even piano in order to make it more explosive, more breathtaking. But very often it's not the audience members but pianists who dare to approach this piece are scared because Ravel deliberately wanted to make this final movement Scarbo more difficult than Balakirev's famous Islamé. And one can hear the influence of the latter composition on Scarbo. And the mastery of Ravel actually is that you compare them, when you compare them back to back, you can recognize the influence, you can feel kind of a similar vibe, but cannot say it's a direct citation or plagiarism. The piece is fantastically composed, and I will give you some examples of it. But in this video, I'm going to address a few technical challenges which are broadly applicable. So even if you don't play this piece, you might actually find something useful which you can, what you can apply to other pieces. But if you plan to work on this piece, in addition to this short dive, you can check out my comprehensive course on this piece where I really go methodically, bar by bar, explaining how I practice this piece and which strategies helped me to master this piece recently. So check out the link in the description for a detailed masterclass. The first challenge we have in this piece is repeated notes, and I think that we have two different types of repeated notes. Like for example, starting in bar 2, we have repeated notes which in my opinion have to be very muffled. Ravel writes très fondu, pedal and stuff, so I think that it should be really like goosebumps on your skin. They have to just imitate that fright, that anxiety, like blood chilling in your veins. That's why it's reasonable to play them working with a range of double repetition of the key. Of course, unfortunately, it's possible only on a good grand pianos and very good vertical pianos, and even some grand pianos are not easy for this regard. Like for example, my has some kind of like a sloppy double action. So it's kind of difficult to find that golden spot, like sweet spot, where you can operate without letting the damper to cover the string, without letting the key to exit fully, get back fully, but nevertheless to get those quick repetitions. But this is exactly what we need here, because otherwise, if you let the key go out, it will be just too real, too straightforward, like an asphalt hammer, you know, and we need something much more subtle, much more mysterious. That's why you can consider to play them with either left hand or right hand. So people do like both hands depending on their capability and of course on the mechanics of the piano. On this heavier mechanic, I prefer nevertheless to use my right hand, but either way, for example, you can experiment with finger 1, 2, which is, in my opinion, a little bit tricky, especially if the mechanics is not super light, because you're going to have like more distance between fingers. Or you can simply hold your hands like in that position and use fingers 3, 2. Because it's so subtle, there is no way to employ like larger arm motions and larger arm parts, bodily parts, in order to help yourself. You really have to rely solely on that finger motions, on that finger motion. So we need something like that. And the quality is less important here. Again, this is a spot which we should treat like color. So it's not about like playing all the notes perfectly. It's more about providing this trembling sound effect. But for the spots which are influenced by a Spanish folklore music, we have to use a rather traditional type of technique, letting the keys of going up fully in order to get more crisp sound, so it would resemble like guitar folklore playing or castanets, like some kind of a Spanish sound aesthetics. And interestingly enough, in such spots, Ravel not only used typical rhythms for Spanish music, like something like that with syncopated notes, but he also used a Phrygian scale, Phrygian mode, like for example in this spot. So these spots, of course, are very important here, and for that reason we have to really be very effective and efficient with the technique we use. What is important, in my opinion, when we play repeated notes in a traditional way, these repeated notes, first of all, to quickly relax the finger after the hit. So the nice starting point, nice starting exercise would be just to kind of fall on the key, activating the fingertip for a very short moment, and then quickly relaxing it without lifting it up. Just let it be, just quickly switch it off. And then the next one, like this. So that's the first exercise I would suggest you. Then, of course, we might concentrate on a few separate different motions we use here. The first motion is just finger motions, which have like knuckles as a starting point. So finger activation is very important here, but it's not everything. Of course, we have a few other motions which are present here, like for example, motions in the keyboard and out of the keyboard. So for shorter fingers like the thumb, I would go in the keyboard like this. Those are tiny motions, we will minimize them, but at first just feel them in a more like broader, exaggerated scale like this. So for the shorter finger in, for longer fingers out. And you can work on them in groups like this. In, out, in, out. If you play any kind of repeated notes which also include the fourth finger, same principle. Out, in, out, in, out, in. And first make literal gaps so you better separate, isolate those motions. Of course, then they will kind of blend into one smooth motion. And another very important motion here is forearm rotation motion, especially when you play the thumb. So when you hit the thumb, you immediately flip over the third finger on top, like this, using the same rotational impulse. So the thumb and the flipping over motion of the third finger is the same motion, like this. That's why a good exercise here would be to actually throw the third finger lower. But you really have to feel how you use this forearm rotation in order to flip over the third finger. In, out, you see? When I play the thumb, I go slightly forward. And then, of course, we have to nevertheless feel the mechanics of the keyboard, because each keyboard will allow you to play these repeated notes with a different speed. So, for example, here, I would have to pull back a little bit if I want to really deliver good quality. So this is the maximum tempo I can allow myself here. Of course, I can risk and push it further, but then I can't guarantee that it will work on this particular keyboard. So it's kind of work, but you see that some repeated notes are already like a little bit shaky. One of the brilliant comments I got recently on my channel on a video dedicated to how to practice, where I have been analyzing different types of memory and speaking about ear memory, visual memory, analytical memory. And one of the questions regarding analytical memory was like, how do you memorize spots which are away from tonal music, which are not easy to analyze, to comprehend how they are constructed? There are at least two answers to that, in my opinion, and let's have a look at this spot as an example. It might sound actually like just some kind of crazy improvisational mess at first when you look at it, but if you look closer, you can actually recognize the pattern. You can recognize that we have basically similar positions, same in the left hand. We just have three chords, which it's difficult to like analyze in terms of like functions, how they relate to each other, but at least we can definitely recognize that this is a G sharp 7, not complete, which kind of collapsed to the next key, and then we have a third which also has G sharp on top. And if you find this kind of logic, you can already memorize the spot even if you don't really know how it is like constructed. So the first option is to find your own logic, to kind of like create it, even if you don't know how it is composed, but you just kind of find some hooks and some logical connections between chords and notes in the texture in order to memorize it easier. And the second option is, of course, more cumbersome, is to learn how this piece was composed. What is the compositional device composers use? Because very often composers, in most of cases, composers use some kind of a logic, some kind of a tool in order to compose. So the notes are usually not just random notes. Like, for example, here, it might sound like a set of just dissonances. But if you would look closer, we can actually recognize that here we have two whole tone scales. One which starts, let's say, on G sharp, and this scale is relevant for beats 1 and 3. So this and this. These two represent sounds from this scale. And beats 2 in each bar of this spot, they represent the second available whole tone scale, starting from A. Yeah, so beats 1 and 3. And beats 2, those are different whole tone scales. If you understand this, then actually you can make some sense out of it. But of course, nevertheless, the spot is tricky, and there are different strategies how to master it, because it's so slippery and so not conventional actually for piano music. That's why, of course, I would suggest you to first learn it with a bit more support and making sure that your thumbs are as supported as fingers 2-3. So fingers 2-3 are very flattened, played on a rather like pull-in motion, and then you really have to feel that you support your thumbs at first in a slower tempo. So in, out, in, out, in, out, in, out. Of course, you won't play like that in a faster tempo, but it's a very good starting point in order to balance the weight in the hand, because very often thumbs are kind of unsupported, and then everything feels really tricky. The second thing which helps me, for example, is to think in cues. And this is a very important, absolutely universal learning strategy when you break the passage into elements, and each element starts from a like cue, from a point which you really know well. And even if something happens within that passage, you nevertheless will be able to play it through, even if with some wrong notes. And in case of this spot, I set up my cues starting from this position. So that's kind of separate element, and then starting from this position. This is my cue, and then I think from this element. So I break the passage in this section. So I really know this very, very well. So even if I mess up somewhere in the middle, I really know where my first note of my cue is. So let's show me how it works. I will on purpose fail now. Yeah, I will on purpose like lose control. God, I didn't succeed in losing control. Okay, let me try again. So as you see, it wasn't that bad as I hoped it will be, but nevertheless, I missed some notes and I almost lost myself. But because I really knew these points, they helped me to stay afloat and not actually just stop, not knowing what to do next. Yeah, so this is a very important strategy which I suggest you to implement to any kind of tricky spot which you learn. Ravel was a brilliant composer, and it looks like he didn't trust pianists much actually, because when he wanted to convey some effect, he wrote it in such a way that even if it would be played by a careless, non-charismatic, unattentive pianist, it still would convey the character. Like, for example, the first initial accelerando, where he writes accelerando with letters, clearly indicating that he wants people to speed up in this part. But in addition to that, he also writes a so-called rhythmical accelerando, by just using eighth notes and then 16 notes with a dot and then just 16 notes. Yeah, so even if I wouldn't do this accelerando artificially, I would nevertheless end up doing basically accelerando. Or, for example, this very entrance movement, which I already have demonstrated how we can actually enhance artistic impression. But even if we don't have any charisma, or we're not sure about the piece, so we kind of not allow ourselves to express ourselves freely, even if I play this formally, it still will work. Because it's written in such a way that we have this drastic leap, this melody is pushed to extreme by using the tiniest interval and then the widest interval, which already makes it very evident what's happening here. And in addition, we have those triplet passages, and then we have duplets. So all that is very precisely written, so that even if we play it formally, it sounds great. But of course, even better would be if we treat this music very creatively. Like, for example, when we get these main thematic elements. Changing colors when you have a new harmony, or feeling that impulse at the first beat, which is written as a separate voice with staccato, and as teacher of Ivo Pogorelic once absolutely geniusly told, this is a claw of Scarbo. So keeping that in mind, we can enhance artistic presence here in the piece. Or, for example, contraposing even more evidently, in a more brave way, these and then those waves which scare us, which are unpredictable, and you never know where they happen, because Ravel very often uses different amount of bars between them. Or, for example, there's also another spot which we can enhance, making it more drastically contrasting, because usually it sounds like a wave when people make crescendo, adding more pedal, and then wave goes down, so it sounds something like... which is kind of cool, but we can actually increase this effect contraposing the way how Scarbo dances on the floor with his naked, crippled, bare feet, and then suddenly lifting off and flying in the air right in front of your nose, like this. And in general, this ostinato, which goes through the most of the piece. This is a great moving factor even when nothing really happens in the piece, like here. You just have one less in harmony, but you still have those which which nevertheless propel the musical flow further. As a pianist Stephen Osborne once said, there is nowhere to hide because the piece is mostly transparent actually, and each note is very important because serves a precise purpose. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. If you want to dive deeper and actually get some precise instructions how to work on this piece in order to master it faster, check out the link in the description. Have fun playing piano and see you next time.